Good morning, everybody. My name is Neil Bennett. I'm the Chief Executive of H Advisors. And on behalf of everyone at H Advisors, it gives me great pleasure to see you all here at the Havas building in the heart of the King's Cross development. Now, first of all, I have to do my air steward thing, that if in the event of an emergency, use the fire exits either up there or up there. There we are, I've done that. This building and this development is a very relevant location for a policy renewal event, since it has been one of London's most remarkable regenerations in the past 20 years. Old-timers like me remember when this area was a wasteland, and a dangerous one at that. The only person that stopped here was the Director of Public Prosecutions, and he got arrested for it. Today, it is home to more than 25,000 people, working mainly in the creative and media technology industries. And once upon a time before that, this was an industrial centre, where the coal that powered London and created its smogs came in by the trainload. And later, you'll see the gas towers, where the gas came in. You can see behind me the original King's Cross station, built in the 1850s, now home to UAL, the largest creative arts university in Europe. Then I'm afraid this area fell into disrepair and ruin until the renewal you see today. It took the combined vision of people in the private and public sector alike to create this environment and renew this area to make it fit for the 21st century and a symbol of London's ability to reinvent itself. I can vouch for myself that this is a place where people come to do their best work, and I feel a surge of optimism every time I come here. The building on the left here is the new Google Europe headquarters, and not far away is DeepMind, one of the world leaders in AI. Nearby too is Meta and the World Centre of Universal Music. So I'm not going to go on, but this is a great place to talk about renewal. As part of our work here, we are always hugely pleased and proud to invite leading politicians and public figures to this building to ensure that we stay at the heart of public debate. And in that spirit, I'm now delighted to welcome Kemi Badenoch, leader of the Conservative Party and leader of the opposition, to talk about the Conservative Party's renewal. Thank you.
Thank you. Neil, thank you for that lovely introduction. We are living off the inheritance of previous generations. For 3 centuries, every era in our country's history left a better legacy for its children. The greatness of the UK was forged by the sacrifices of our ancestors. They built, they innovated, and they took tough decisions. They never assumed that prosperity was guaranteed. They made sure that it was. But that has bred an assumption that Britain will always be wealthy. We are a wealthy country, but we are becoming weaker through complacency. We are losing our resilience. We can't make things like we used to. We don't build as quickly. We are spending too much on debt, too much on welfare, and too little on defense. We are not growing like we should be. That's us. That's Canada, a little higher. That's the US growth. And up there at the top is Australia. We are not creating a legacy for the next generation. Worse than that, we are mortgaging our children's future by not recognizing that the world has changed. We're making things harder and harder for them across the board. If you look at real disposable income, or GDP per capita, or home ownership, you will see that things are stagnating or going backwards. In 1974, you could save up for a deposit to buy a house in less than 6 months. Now the average time is more than 11 years. Conservatism is about ensuring the very best of our society is preserved for the next generation, not just our own. As Roger Scruton said, conservatism is about the love of what exists, not because it is perfect, but because it is ours, and because it has grown from the lives of those who came before us. Our party has a proud history of helping the country recover from crisis. The Cold War, the economic reforms of the 1980s, the aftermath of the 2008 financial crash. It has often been our duty to shepherd our country's recovery. Yet last July, we suffered the worst defeat in our party's history. We replaced the principles-based government that brought us success with the managerialism of Labour that gave our power to quangos and courts. We assumed that we would always be wealthy, so we focused on the status quo rather than the future. And now Labour are back, and they are already making everything worse. Jobs are disappearing, taxes are rising, and growth is shrinking. They are vandalizing education, and they are completely clueless on the need for real reform of regulation. But we have to acknowledge that Labour are there because we made mistakes. And the public made it very clear that the Conservative Party needed some time away from government. Our job right now is to use that time wisely, just as Margaret Thatcher and David Cameron did in generations past. And just like the 1970s and 2000s, our party cannot shortcut our way back into office with easy answers or rushed announcements. We must develop credible plans that are based on shared conservative values: personal responsibility, citizenship, sound money, family, freedom, and so much more. Plans that show that we are thinking about tomorrow, plans that are ambitious, tackling problems with the detail they deserve, but are rooted in realism, not wishful thinking. Today, I am talking about one of the biggest ways that we are destroying our children's inheritance. Let's start by telling the truth on energy and net zero. Every single thing we do in our daily lives is dependent on cheap, abundant energy. When energy became cheap and abundant, living standards began to rise. Health and life expectancy grew. Cheap, abundant energy is the foundation of civilization as we know it today. We mess with it at our peril. But that's exactly what's been happening for 20 years. And it's now starting to cause real pain for everyday people and businesses. The cost of electricity, far too high, much higher than nearby and comparative countries, with the real possibility that it's going even higher still with environmental levies. A big chunk of our existing bills are not direct energy costs. People are struggling to pay them. Businesses, especially manufacturing businesses, are closing down, and there is no real plan for bringing costs down. That surely cannot hold. It's fantasy politics built on nothing, promising the earth and costing it too. As a society, we have been trying to do two things at once: keep energy costs down whilst reducing our impact on the environment. These are both noble aims. Conservatives like Margaret Thatcher have always been custodians of our natural environment, cherishing the forests that breathe life into our world, protecting the rivers that nourish our lands, and preserving the landscapes that inspire our souls. It is our duty to safeguard the delicate balance of nature for future generations. But the current policies the UK has been implementing are not doing this, while at the same time driving up the cost of energy. We're falling between two stools: too high costs, too little progress. And why? Because there's never, ever been a detailed plan. Ed Miliband's Climate Change Act 2008, no plan. The carbon budgets, no economic plan. And then in 2019, Parliament legislated for net zero by 2050, but no plan. A multi-trillion pound, 30-year project touching every single aspect of all our lives was decided in 90 minutes without a single vote. Of the 22 MPs who spoke that day, only 2 sounded notes of caution. I was one of them. I asked for the plan. I asked for it that day. I asked for it many days after, and I waited and waited and waited. 840 days later, a plan came, and it wasn't enough. So much so that environmental bodies are taking the government to court and winning because there isn't enough detail. We are closing down oil fields in Scotland that we need from transition from gas to renewables because the plan doesn't make sense. Let's think about it for a minute. We are already 1/6 of the way through net zero 2050 that we planned that day, and we are still arguing about what the plan is to get there. And all the politicians who gloss over the lack of a plan will be long gone when those targets are missed in the future and our children suffer. So please don't be fooled, and certainly don't be fooled by other parties' rhetoric. I remember Nick Clegg dismissing the idea of building new nuclear because it would not come online until 2022. That decision has cost us billions. Who was the Lib Dem Energy Secretary? Ed Davey, now leading the Liberal Democrats. And new parties will turn up, like Reform, who don't have real answers to our country's challenges. That's why their energy policy fell apart right after they announced it. We need a serious approach. We've got to stop pretending it's simple, and we have got to stop government by press release announcements without a policy plan. Making promises and not delivering is exactly the reason that the political class has lost trust. The only way that we can regain it is to tell the unvarnished truth. Net zero by 2050 is impossible. I don't say that with pleasure. I want a better future and a better environment for our children, but we have to get real. Anyone who has done any serious analysis knows it cannot be achieved without a significant drop in our living standards, or worse, by bankrupting us. Responsible leaders don't indulge in fictions which are going to make families poorer or mortgage their children's future. Without the rest of the world doing the same, we are making our country less safe, less secure, and less resilient. Let me give you 3 truths at the heart of net zero. First, the published plans are completely muddled. It is true that the UK has made the greatest progress on carbon emissions in the developed world. Yet we are only responsible for 1% of global emissions. Even if we hit absolute zero, we will not have net zero around the world if other countries are not following us. And they are not. They certainly will not if they see us bankrupting ourselves to get there. Our success at reducing emissions has also come at a significant cost. The highest electricity bills in the developed world. What's extraordinary is that so much of the cost of our energy bills is not directly from the wholesale cost of energy. Huge amounts are being spent on switching around how we distribute electricity, because we effectively build 2 systems now of electricity generation, one based on renewables and one not. One for when the sun shines and the wind blows, and one for when they don't. Instead of dealing with these challenges, Labour play rhetorical games, talking about missions, goals, and mistaking press releases about GB Energy for actual solutions. The real reason no one in their government is talking about a proper overall plan is that they know it would reveal just how catastrophic the actual costs will be for families, for businesses, and for our economy. Those costs include families being forced to replace perfectly functioning cars, boilers, and cookers with more expensive, less reliable versions of the same thing. The costs will mean businesses paying much more than we already are for energy. So our industrial base and manufacturing businesses get weakened even further. And it will mean our economy losing out on exploiting our own natural resources in the North Sea, while being saddled with ever greater debt. That's just the first truth. Second, even where there is a plan, we are behind. Let's look at one easy example. By 2040, the Committee on Climate Change says more than half of UK homes need to rip out their boilers and replace them with a heat pump. There is no way we can do this quickly enough on that timescale. 17 million houses need to be fitted with an expensive heat pump in just 15 years. How many houses have one now? Fewer than 300,000. Because heat pumps run on a lot of expensive electricity, and it turns out many people just don't like them. But let's look at the good statistics. Last year, we saw the highest number of heat pumps ever installed in the UK, 50,000. That's the best we've ever done. So at that rate, it will take 340 years, not 15, to get to the target. And most of the 50,000 were installed with some form of government subsidy, or as I prefer to call it, taxpayers' money. There's a lot less of taxpayers' money now, and that's before government spending gets further constrained by the need to spend more on defense. This is not a criticism of green technology. I support the shift to renewables when they make energy cheaper and more secure. However, they are not a perfect solution and come with their own challenges, which brings me to the third truth. We are massively exposing ourselves to countries who do not share our values. Take solar panels. The good news is that costs have dropped in the last decade. Here's the less good news. 10 years ago, we were heavily dependent on China for all of the key components. Today, we're even more dependent. Look at the top dozen makers of solar panels. They are nearly all Chinese. That's an extraordinary dependency, given what we learned during COVID about over-reliance on these supply chains. What about wind farms? Where do we think that most production is currently? You guessed it, China, which means that they are all produced using Chinese energy. 60% of their supply comes from coal-fired power stations. They are building a new one every other week to keep up with our demand. Look at electric vehicles, all reliant on batteries to work. One country dominates production of the component parts which create them. Those three truths are why I call myself a net zero skeptic. Muddled plans, unrealistic targets and deadlines, over-reliance on China. We have got to start acknowledging what is in plain sight. Net zero makes us dangerously dependent on countries who don't share our values, and it is risking our energy security. It is time to stop pretending everything will be fine. And I'm certainly not debating whether climate change exists. It does. I badly want to leave a much better environmental inheritance for my children and for yours. But it doesn't look like we are going to get remotely close to net zero by 2050, and neither will any autocracy, not that they're trying to anyway. This is what happens when politics turns into fantasy. Maybe some of it will change, but it doesn't look promising. Ed Miliband spends all of his time making big promises, telling people he will cut household bills by £300 while having no idea how. And by the way, they've gone up by almost £300 since Labour came into office. I often say that when you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they need to hear. We have to tell the truth. The plans for net zero by 2050 are impossible. We have to do better than this. That's why, as part of our policy renewal, we are going to do something that Labour failed to do in 14 years of opposition. We are going to deal with reality, confront the real problems, answer the real questions, and be ready with a plan. We will cover numerous areas, but today we start on energy and net zero. To do that, our team, led by Shadow Secretary of State Claire Coutinho, will be looking at all aspects of the UK's future energy and net zero policies. Few have spent more time trying to unpack the modelled thinking at the heart of the net zero debate than Claire. She will be supported by Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland, Andrew Bowie, and Lord Offord. I'm tasking her team with finding and working with the people who know the truth and who can come up with achievable solutions, people who can answer from experience, how we can deliver cheap and clean energy without bankrupting businesses, without eye-watering bills for households, without dependencies on hostile or unstable countries. Labour may not be interested in these questions, but we are. We are interested because as Conservatives, we want to protect our environment. We want to secure our energy and deliver a better world for our children. Someone has to save these noble objectives from the zealots who have hijacked this agenda. The best way to deliver clean energy and a better environment is with the market, not state diktat, not pretend statistics from vested interests or rent seekers who want to keep this fiction going for as long as possible. Telling the truth on net zero and energy is just the start of actually ensuring we leave an inheritance for the next generation. I said at my party conference speech that we were going to rewire, reprogram, and reboot the way government works so it serves the public again. Today, the Conservative Party is taking the first step in the UK's biggest policy renewal programme in 50 years. Tomorrow, my shadow cabinet will begin to do the same with many of the other problems that we see. Getting people back to work, dealing with a society that is fragmenting, not integrating, fixing healthcare, repairing the mess Labour are making right now in education, improving productivity, controlling immigration and dealing with the lawfare that stops elected officials from making democratic decisions. And there will be so much more. In the weeks ahead, I will say more on the academics, experts, business people, members from all walks of life who will help us get to the root cause of our country's problems. Our party members shape our policy, and they will be at the heart of this. They joined the Conservative Party because they want to change the country for the better. Our policy renewal will be the foundation of making that happen for the next decade. And if you are not a Conservative Party member, but like what you hear, join us. We need your support, your help, your expertise. Join us and help provide a better inheritance for our children. The party is under new leadership, and we are going to do things differently. We are serious about changing our country for the better. And the first way to do that is to realize we don't just exist to win elections. We have to know what we are winning for and what we are going to do after we win. Diagnosing the real problems, finding workable solutions, building a proper plan, then being ready to rebuild and make our country stronger again, just as we have done in generations past. Fighting for ordinary people, for the institution of the family, for business, for common sense, for less tax, less state, and less interference. And finally, ensuring that our generation can leave a real and true inheritance, a better world for our children once again. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So, I have a list. I have a list of people who would like to ask questions from the media. The first one is Carl Dinnan from ITV. Carl.
Hi, up at the back here in the gods.
Ah, right.
I'll wave at you. What do you say? You've said you want to rip up this plan for getting to net zero by 2050, but you haven't said that although you support net zero, when you would like to get there. What do you say to those who say that if you've got no target, you've got no plan?
That's not how it works. You can't just pull targets out of the air. And what we did was pick a target and then start thinking of how to get there. we need to start thinking about it in a different way. How does this impact families? How is business going to help us deliver? And that's what the policy commissions are going to do. So what I'm not going to do is rush out and say it should be by 2051 or 2049. Why is it 2050 in the first place? No one knows. This is one of the things that we have got to fix, just simply making announcements without plans. So at some point, we will come out with new policies, but it may be that there's a better way of delivering net zero. Or it may be that we shouldn't be looking at net zero, but just focusing on clean energy and energy security. And there's a different way of doing that. That is what we want. There will be some people who will disagree with what I've said, and I will ask them, send me your ideas for how to make this net zero by 2050 plan work that is not just wishful thinking or bankrupting our country. We want to hear from everyone, not just the people who agree with us. And that is how we will make sure that we have a comprehensive and coherent plan that actually delivers. Ali Fortescue from Sky.
Thank you, Ali Fortescue from Sky. In government, you did support net zero targets. What has substantially changed since then? And I also want to ask you a broader question, because you're seen as a straight talker, so I'm hoping we can get a straight answer. It is not difficult to find colleagues of yours who think that you're failing to cut through as leader. Do you think those colleagues have underestimated you, or were you overestimated when the party picked you to be its leader?
Okay, thank you. So on the first question, I haven't changed my mind. What you're describing is called collective responsibility. I was a member of the government. I sat in the committees where people were trying to make the plans work, and I could see that they were not going to deliver. I said so in 2019 when I asked the question when it was first announced. I said it again in 2022 when I first stood for leadership. I said it in 2023 when I lobbied to reduce the ZEV mandates that was being imposed on the car manufacturers who were coming to my office telling me it couldn't work. And I said it again last year, 2024. The person who's been consistent all this is me. And I'm not going to pretend that I won't have critics. And it's not easy to find critics. This is politics. Being a politician is about being criticized. What I'm asking people to do is listen to what I'm saying. I am not doing what all the other parties are doing. We are changing the way we do things. The Conservative Party is under new leadership, and we have to make sure that we think things through and don't just give announcements without a proper plan to back them up. Ryan Saby from The Sun.
Ms. Badenoch, hi. Labour has made great play of reducing bills by £300. Do you have any aspiration? Do you offer any hope to consumers that you can actually do that?
What we need to do is start from objectives that are not abstract. Net zero by 2050 is an abstract objective. We need to start with how are we making people's lives better? Is this going to keep businesses going? How do we make bills cheaper is one of them. And one of the first reports we're going to be writing is how do we bring costs down? Costs are way too high. When I was business secretary, business after business would come in and say that we're leaving the country because we can't produce here. There is no point having net zero making the energy costs so high that people can't warm their homes and people cannot start businesses. It has to be sustainable. The US electricity prices are about 4 times cheaper than ours. We must fix that. And if we're going to be making bills higher, we need to look at some of the foolish things Labour is doing, like stripping away the winter fuel payment. It doesn't make sense. It's not coherent, and it's because they are not thinking about the impact on everyday people. Ben Wright from the BBC.
Thank you. The aim of the 2050 net zero target is to stave off catastrophic climate change. By abandoning a target set by a Tory Prime Minister, aren't you simply trying to trump Reform UK, which also wants to scrap net zero and stave off the threat to your party from Nigel Farage?
There was no reform in 2019 when I first spoke about this. There was no reform in 2022. I've been talking about this for a long time. We do need to tackle climate change, but if a plan isn't working, we can't just keep bringing out a broken plan and saying we'll keep going on with it. Let's get a plan that works. If the way to tackle climate change is net zero, let's figure out a way that does it without bankrupting our country and impoverishing our people. That is the message that I am giving here today. Chris Hope, GB News.
Thank you, Kemi Badenoch. There's been some reporting that you may be doubting your commitment to the pension triple lock at the next election. That wasn't mentioned in your list there of things you're looking at. Can you confirm here and now you will maintain the pension triple lock if you win in the next election? I can ask a quick second one about Ukraine. There is concern about our commitment to Ukraine amongst GB News viewers. Should MPs get a vote before we deploy British troops on the ground?
I think that on Ukraine, that's relatively easy. We should have a consensus across Parliament on this. This is a very significant decision. It's taking us to war. On the first question, I have said repeatedly that the Conservative Party policy is to maintain the triple lock. When we are changing policy, I will stand on a stage like this and I will announce that we're changing policy. Until then, the policy stays the same. Thank you. Aubrey Allegretti from The Times.
Hello. You've reiterated your belief in man-made climate change and suggested that we should improve how we tackle it. Do you think that that is best done on an industrial, a national and international level? Or do you think it's sort of still worth people taking small actions in their own day-to-day lives? And if so, what do you personally do in your household to stay green? Do you, for example, plan to buy an electric car like a Tesla?
So no, I do not plan to buy a Tesla. But you're absolutely right. One of the things that I mentioned in my speech was the Conservative principles, and one of them is personal responsibility. We do believe in being custodians of our natural environment, and everybody has to take personal responsibility and do what we can to make sure that we reduce our impact on the environment. And whether that's with buying a car that is more sustainable, building a home that is passive, we should all do everything we can. The problem comes when the government makes a plan that people cannot handle and forces them to do things that they cannot afford and puts it in law. That's one of the issues. And I do think that this has to come from international consensus. There is no point the UK getting to net zero if everybody else is carrying on as they are. If China is opening a coal-fired power station every 2 weeks, we're not going to get to net zero like that. But we can make sure that whatever we're doing, we have our core objectives in mind. Cleaner, cheaper energy, and a better environment. That's what we need to start from. We spend too much time talking about the abstract of net zero rather than the reality of what we're trying to deliver. And I'm trying to shift the conversation so that it is rooted in realism. Thank you. Aggie Champ from LBC. I hope I said that right.
Almost. Aggie Shambury from LBC. Very close. Can I just be completely clear on targets? So will you come out with a target at some stage? What stage will that be if you do? And just now you talked about personal responsibility. Can you talk about what you do in terms of personal responsibility? Do you recycle? Do you cycle around on a bike? What else do you do?
Right. So I'm not going to stand here and just make a target. If I did so, that would be me repeating the same mistake, just plucking something out of the air. If we do find that all of the subject matter experts who come together decide that a target is necessary, then yes, we will have one. But what I'm not going to do is just have one side of the debate, the people who are theorists, the people who work on one side of the climate change discussion. We need to have everybody in that room. And that includes the people who are running businesses, who often know more than the theorists or the officials in Whitehall who are making these plans. I saw it happen. It also needs to have skeptics in the room. Shutting out skeptics means that your plans will never be robust. And that's how we're going to make sure that we get a plan that actually works. And on my side, I do everything I can to make sure that I reduce my impact on the environment. I don't buy many clothes for my children. They will tell you this. They do a lot of recycling. And it's also cheaper, actually, to be sustainable. So that's why I know I'm doing my best. Harriet Line from The Mail.
Thank you. On the other policies in the Policy Renewal programme, will you examine whether to commit to pulling out of the European Convention on Human Rights? And has your thinking on this changed, or are you still on the fence?
So what I said in the leadership campaign still holds, that if we need to leave the ECHR, we will do so, but we're not going to do it without a plan. I remember voting before I became an MP in the 2016 Brexit referendum, only to become an MP the next year and see that we'd made a decision, but a lot of the thinking had not been done and we were making it up on the fly. We cannot do that again. Even leaving the ECHR is not enough to solve the myriad problems that we have. That's why I talked about lawfare in its entirety. There are many things, including some of the agreements that underpin how we've got to net zero. So we will need something that looks across the board. I have been talking about complete policy renewal, not policy tweaks or just things that are for the moment, but that will last for the long-term future. Okay, I think we have come to the end of the questions. So I just want to thank everyone who's given up their Tuesday morning to be here. I know that this will be challenging for some, but I welcome the challenge. We're going to do this together. We can deliver a better inheritance for our children, and the policy work begins now. Thank you.